Hello everyone. So the wild robot. So this video is going to be a continuation of what we talked about in class. If you were in class when we talked about it. But for those who might be in a Smile 2 class and are watching this because you want to write about the wild robot, it'll also serve as some general info for the wild robot, and it'll recap what we talked about in class briefly as well. So if you were there in class, we talked about how the wild robot comes from Chris Sanders and was based on a book by Peter Brown. So Chris Sanders directed Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, which also dealt with disability. And Lilo and Stitch in particular had Lilo as an apparent autism-coded character, which will be relevant because Roz herself is also seen as potentially autism-coded. So DreamWorks, like we said, has a history of dealing with disability. In their early movies, they had minor disabled characters who sort of were comic relief characters or played for laughs. Their disabilities were played for laughs, whereas in their more recent films, they have serious and positive disabled representation. And that applies to the wild robot, I would definitely say. These are the symbols, if you recall, if you were in class when we talked about them, that I felt were significant to what the film is saying about disability. And I'm not going to talk about these in this video necessarily. I'll probably reference them, but we did have the notes that we took in class that you can consult about these symbols. And for the sake of this video, I just wanted to talk about the characters and the themes and what the movie is saying about disability. I wanted to get through the PowerPoint, so I wanted to talk about Roz a bit more. So she is a robot, and obviously, as a robot, it would seem that she has super abilities, correct? She can imitate any animal, but she at first struggles to fit in among the animals. So it would seem even though it seems she can do anything, she really can't do everything. She still struggles, right? That said, she is distinct from the animals because she believes in kindness as a survival tool, which is basically the whole message or theme behind the wild robot. Kindness as a survival tool, which really applies in the real world when there are people who struggle in the real world, disabled people among them, and kindness, can be a good thing, or obviously it is a good thing to help them get along through their struggles. But yeah, she's different from the animals because she doesn't really buy into the whole survival of the fittest, predator and prey thing. She believes in kindness. She loses her leg defending Bright Bill against Rockmouth, and also her hand, temporarily at least. So, yeah, she sees an instance of a predator hunting down its prey. She sees what the island is all about, and she intervenes. She doesn't believe that Bright Bill is destined to be eaten because he is a runt, because he is disabled. She thinks disabled folks, animals, what have you, should be treated with kindness and deserve a chance, so she sort of goes against the whole predator-prey dynamic on the island. And interestingly enough, as we discovered in class, if you were there, she also is nice to the fish, even though the fish, Rockmouth, tried to eat her son. That is all kinds of nice. That is crazy. Something else about Roz is some viewers found her to be autism coded because, as we hit upon in class, she is dead set on completing her task. Her task is her thing. And a lot of autistic folks have a certain special interest that they occupy their time with. So that could be seen in Roz needing to complete her task. She also takes things quite literally, as autistic folks tend to do, and she struggles to fit in. Her way of saying things, she says some things, like scan the QR code that when she first arrives at the island, that the animals don't really like, they don't really get, they don't really understand her. So we can see how she might be coded as autistic. And even though she's an outcast, they eventually come to understand her. So yeah, that is one angle you can take as being a positive example of autism representation, perhaps. Let's talk about Brightbill some more. So, of course, his disability would be that he is a runt. He was born small. And, of course, he cannot fly or swim well at first. He has to learn to do it his own way. And there is that quote that says, "Fly like you, not like them." I think Longneck says that. So yeah, he very much represents the social model of disability, which I wanted to talk about. He is subjected to ableism from the other geese because he was raised by a robot, and he struggles with swimming, and he's a runt, and what have you, and they're all like, "You're not one of us. You're weird." But then, of course, the fact that he was raised by a robot becomes an asset because he's able to think differently from the other geese, and he's able to lead the pack. The pack, they're not wolves, lead the flock away from that Universal Dynamics greenhouse because he understands the robots, because he was raised by them. He has a different way of thinking from the other geese. And some people also would say, well, that means he could be autism coded. He thinks differently, right? And that is ultimately what gets them out of trouble, because he has a different way of thinking. So there we go. That could be, but I think he definitely represents the social model of disability. He even, as Roz says, the mutation that made you small does not mean you cannot fly, right? So he can still fly. He can in his own way. He can still do things even though he's a runt. He represents the social model. We talked a lot about Paddler, but I'll talk about him some more. He definitely represents the cultural model, is the big thing I wanted to say. In other words, he's different. He seems to have OCD, perhaps, or at least that's implied because of his obsession with cutting down the tree. And Fink even says, you and him aren't so unalike. You're all about your task. He's all about cutting down the biggest tree on the island. So he realizes that he and Roz aren't that dissimilar, and that's what causes him to make her the prosthetic leg. So, they bond over the fact that they are different. They find some sort of identity in their differences, and that would definitely represent the cultural model of disability. All right. And that segues nicely into the whole theme of community, because, of course, Paddler giving her the leg is an example of community, and also Roz recruiting Thunderbolt to teach Brightbill how to fly because she knows she alone can't do that. That is also an example of community. And community is how disabled people thrive when they have a positive support system, when they have friends and family who are looking out for them. That's how they thrive, and we can see that play out in the film. When people have support, they do well, etc. Kindness is a survival tool, right? Community is important for survival. And yeah, Roz puts the predator animals and the prey animals under one roof, and they vow to not harm each other. And they learn something from Roz, because they do end up surviving the winter, because she instills the value of community in them, and they repay her by protecting her from the Universal Dynamic robots when they come to reclaim her. And of course, Paddler the beaver helps put out that forest fire, right? Because he found community with Roz. So, yeah, community is everything when it comes to fighting against ableism, when it comes to thriving in the world as a disabled person. It's not a survival of the fittest mentality. It's everybody support each other mentality, is what the film is telling us is good. That leads me to Universal Dynamics, and I hit upon this before, but I think they very much are supposed to be a parody of Epcot. It seems like it's a dig at Disney, sort of like how Shrek mocked Disneyland in Shrek, which is also a DreamWorks production, because DreamWorks and Disney, I won't get into it, but they've always had sort of a feud going on, because DreamWorks was founded as a competitor to Disney. But anyway, that's besides the point. Universal Dynamics is all about a sterile, pre-planned life, and that really doesn't work with the sort of community that Roz builds, that involves flexibility, that involves not being a predator and not being prey for at least a moment, you know. Flexibility and improvisation are what make a strong community. You don't want to... A community where everything is planned for you isn't really a real community, is it? It's just a, dare I say it, robotic, sterile way of life, which is what the original Epcot would have been under Walt Disney. He wanted to make a city where everything was taken care of for everyone, but no one really took care of each other. And I think that's the difference between this sort of community and the community the film advocates for, where everyone takes care of each other instead of everything being taken care of for everyone, because everything being taken care of for everyone doesn't necessarily mean a better life, a better community. And it, especially not for the robots, who are essentially treated like slaves in the Universal Dynamic community. I still love Epcot. Sorry, I just love Disney. But anyway, let's keep going. Anyway, I thought this was interesting. I bet you didn't know this movie references a Czech play from 100 years ago. So the name Rosm Robots is a reference to this play from 1921 called Rosm's Universal Robots, and it was the play that introduced the word robot to the English language. This is where that word comes from. So the robots in the play are not artificial, they're also organic, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, the robots in the play are they are artificial, but they're also organic, sort of like Roz, because she is artificial, but she isn't just a machine. She has a heart, right? Despite her broken power core, she has a heart, which we see at the end of the film when she reunites with Bright Bill. So, and she also, of course, has her prosthetic leg, which is made of wood, an organic material, which really solidifies her as the wild robot. She's not just a machine, she's not just an appliance, she is a being with a soul. And that whole idea is also explored in that play. Are robots creatures with souls? Are they simply appliances? What are they? So yeah, I just thought that was interesting. It's a very intentional reference, and I thought I would share it with y'all, and let's keep going. Well, actually, I think, that pretty much says everything that needs to be said. The movie excels at disabled representation, and going back to this for a second, I think it dispels any idea that if you are a disabled person, you are like a robot in a negative way. Be it because you have some sort of prosthetic, be it because you have a different way of thinking, because you might be neurodivergent or what have you. Even if you are different, you still have a soul, right? You're still a person. And yeah, I think that's really beautiful. I think that's wonderful. I think this film does a great job at disabled representation. Much better than Disney, with their live-action Snow White using CGI dwarves instead of real little people, which was a big controversy. That's rough. But anyway, I would note that the characters, Bright Bill and the Wild Robot, Roz, they are not human, right? And it isn't... they have souls, but they're still not literal humans. And it's not explicit whether they're autistic. You sort of have to read into that aspect. So, even though it's good representation, they still aren't human characters, so real people might not feel as seen because of that. But DreamWorks is apparently working on that. They're telling stories with disabled humans. They already have, in terms of Hiccup and How to Train Your Dragon. And I'm sure there are other examples as well. But apparently they're doing a show about Madagascar, and they have a deaf girl who uses sign language on it, and I'm all here for it. So good job, DreamWorks. You're doing great. Disney, you need to step up your game when it comes to disabled representation. But anyway, that's what I would say about The Wild Robot and how it treats disability. And I hope that gives y'all some ideas about what to write about. And I will see y'all next time. Thank you, guys.
Please comment the answers to or email me the answers to the following questions. 1. What is an example of the social model in The Wild Robot? 2. What is an example of the medical model in The Wild Robot? 3. What is an example of ableism in The Wild Robot?